The final two topics of the day, and both are really important topics as well. One is about the commercial helicopter market, the trends and the developments. And the second one is from Abu Dhabi Aviation. Dr. Mark will be speaking about the challenges of oil and gas, offshore tenders for helicopter operators. Since we are running a bit late, we are just skipping the coffee break currently and moving on to the next topic, which will be presented by Mr. Jason Diniz. He's the president from Eagle Copters. He spoke earlier. Now he's going to speak about the commercial helicopter market. Mr. Jason. Welcome.
Thanks, man. All right. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet because I know it's a long day today. So, about the helicopter market. Today I'm going to share with you a few concepts of how we assess the market, how we study the market from an objective perspective, from a subjective perspective. And there's one basic reason that we always look at, and that is always staying on the right side of the valuation curve. Everything about aviation is tied to valuation. I heard in a previous presentation it was about components in life. It's absolutely true. If you have a good-looking aircraft and your components are zero time, it's worth almost nothing. So it's all about valuation of components, valuation of the aircraft. And you would want to look at it over a 5-year life cycle because usually in 5 years you have your ups and downs of the aviation market. If you can ride the trend where even on the bottom end of the curve, your valuation is still healthy where you can flip it and break even or you can flip it and make a profit, now that is the kind of buy you want to make. So today, we work with customers around the world. We talk to customers around the world, OEMs, government organizations. We gather a lot of data ourselves. We also get some market research. I'd say we depend upon 15% of market research, but the rest of the analysis is really done internally at my company. We have an analytics team that every quarter we plug in a ton of data, usually about 65,000 line items, to come up with what I will show you in a little bit. But for the purpose of today, I really want to talk about the Middle East, Africa, and India. This is the net new market growth in the world. You will see aircrafts deployed around the world, but when you think about net new growth and for the next 10, 15, 20 years, this is where it's going to be. My first caveat is China is definitely a key player for the foreseeable future, but that market is pretty well supported within the Chinese setup. We do not have an active strategic plan in China, so I don't really want to speak about China in general terms because I won't be able to speak to it knowledgeably. Secondly, my company specializes in light, intermediate, and medium segments. These are segments that are active in the Middle East. There's one segment that is also active that is not on here. It's super mediums, which are the 189s and Leonardos or the H175s. But we really don't do a ton of work in those two spaces, so I will not be speaking to that. I came upon an interesting acronym called PESTLE, and it really is the acronym used by the Business Research Company. They do a lot of good analytics around the world, so if you are interested in getting your hands on some analytics, I suggest looking them up. But basically the point is, there are 5 or 6 drivers that constantly influence our market. And if I had to break that down, politically, I always start with politically because it does impact a lot of different economic, social, environment. Everything else basically stems from here. At the present time, we believe there's a lot of government support for helicopter manufacturing around the world. You got HAL in India, you got the Turkish aerospace industry coming up. Your top 4 industries, your top 4 OEMs like Airbus, Bell, they continue to innovate. But you're looking at emerging markets starting to get into the field, which is interesting. There's definitely quite a bit of military and parapublic spending. Parapublic in the sense of police, border security, etc. And with the political imbalance going on right now in the world, there's a big shift to backfill Eastern Bloc aircraft, mainly operating in Africa. There's a lack of parts, there's a lack of sustainability of those aircraft. They're very good aircraft, but they cannot sustain like they used to in the last 2 years, or prior to that. Economical, we all know the factors on the economics. High interest rates, high inflation, capital constriction. It's really causing an issue with new capital acquisitions. But spending trends are shifting towards Asia Pacific and Africa. If you look at the amount of dollars that are going into net aircraft induction, the sheer numbers into India, Southeast Asia, China for sure, and Africa is quite significant. When you think about the social side, I would say the helicopter industry was really dominated by 3 or 4 regions in the world, i.e. North America, Europe, Australasia. But in the last 10, 15 years, you're seeing a similar expansion into fields apart from what I call as mature markets. And that growth rate is far superseding what we've seen in the mature markets. We're also seeing a lot of technical institutes coming up in these emerging markets, which is a really good thing because they're backfilling the shortage of labor that is really existing today. It's a big problem in the market today, but we're happy to have a lot of technical expertise coming from different parts of the world, and Eagle ourselves, we're recruiting quite heavily from around the world. Technology, you'll continue to hear that. The reality of the matter is that we will keep evolving. There's a lot of demand from various segments in political chambers, in social chambers that are driving drones, eVTOL, urban mobility, and such. But I truly believe, even though we talk about these technologies a lot, the regulation, the setup, the infrastructure, to get that to the market in a period that most people are talking about these days are probably going to be challenging. Environmental, we certainly can't take our eyes off that. The reality is noise pollution, a lot more urban aircraft travel within cities, intra-cities, is really causing us to rethink how we do this and sustainably. There's a lot of natural disasters occurring around the world. You're looking at the firefighting situation going around the world, flooding in Africa, fires. Australia was burning significantly 2 years ago. Canada, my country, has been on fire, quite frankly, for the last 2 months. Europe, it's causing a significant need to have assets mobilized to address the situation. And then finally, legal. Look, the reality is some markets are a lot more mature in terms of the legal perspective, the financial perspective compared to others. Because of that, Western investors have stayed away from those markets because of the uncertainty. But we see that shifting. We see governments actively taking part in ensuring that the infrastructure is there to support not only local players, but definitely international players. So you put this all together, here are high-level numbers. Again, these are directional. You can see pre-COVID, we were looking pretty good. The market had about a 3% contraction year over year to 2022. But now you look at 2022 to 2027, which is another 5-year cycle, there's definitely an upward curve. And then from 2027 to 2032, that's even more significant. When you think about 6.7% CAGR over the 5 years to come, that's significant. I don't think the market has seen that level of growth in probably the last 25 years. And then when you get back to 2027 to 2032, and that's 3.9%, now that is a good market in what we've seen in good times, but the 6.7 is actually a very bullish market. When you look at the segmentation of these helicopters, I've got mediums and super mediums in the one area that's green, lightweight certainly, and then the heavies, you're looking at more of the AS332s, the H225s. It's a good representation right there where the market today is dominated by mediums and super mediums around the world. Now let's look at that data from a different perspective. Transport currently dominates that market. But if you really look at, what's happening over the next few years, law enforcement, public safety has, that's certainly taken up a bit. Transport is so and so. I'd say it's averaging and plateauing out. But what I'm getting at is there's a significant need to sustain biorepublic applications and mission types. North America, as a percentage, will contract, starting from 35% and winding down to 33%. Then the numbers might be marginally higher, but as a percentage will contract. Look at Asia Pacific. It goes from 20% to a projected of 24%. Now, in an installed base of well over, call it 24 to 26,000 helicopters commercially, to move the needle by even 1% is quite significant. So when you're looking at Asia Pacific and the growth, it is absolutely, we're looking at this in a strong way. Western Europe, even though it's flatlined, the reality is it's still a significant market. Eastern Europe, of course. Africa, I think there'll be a lot more growth than what they're projecting right now. And the Middle East, yes, organizations like Falcon and their helicopter company are buying quite a lot of aircraft. But when you think about THC going from 0 to 58 aircraft next year, in the concept of 12,000 commercial helicopters in North America or 14,000 helicopters, it doesn't really shift the needle. It's still significant, but it will take some time to catch up. Now, let's look at some drivers in the Middle East. There are some significant organizations here. You think about Abu Dhabi Aviation. They've been around since 1976. Falcon, 2006. Gulf, 1970. And AeroGulf, 1976. These are some long-time organizations. They're well-established. They're well-known. They've got a fantastic record. And then you've got organizations that have started in the last 10 years, and they're also growing at a pretty fast pace. Now, what are the drivers in these markets? So there's definitely significant expansion. There's quite a lot of investments coming into the market. When you think about ADA and ADQ and that planned merger, which has just gone through, as we read recently, $2.6 billion. It's massive. And then the Dubai HeliPark, they've just started construction as of, I think it was announced a month ago, where the second phase has started. That's another massive project in place to make Dubai one of the biggest heliports in the world. And the innovation, Falcon, they truly are leading the way. With what's going on with Falcon and 35 eVTOLs coming in 2026, I don't think anyone anywhere in the world has such an aggressive plan to get eVTOLs apart from Falcon in Dubai. It's significant. I also would like to point out the UAE's target to get to net zero emissions by 2050, and Dubai to get by 30% reduction by 2030. That's significant. What's going on in Africa? So there's actually quite a lot of operators in Africa, but there's been a lot of uncertainty. There's been a lot of financial issues with some of these operators. Sonair, the company we're looking at to buy some aircraft, they had, I want to say, probably 15 or 20 aircraft that they bought about 10 years ago, and within 3 months they parked them all because of issues within the organizations. It's unfortunate. Africa has the ability to spend on aircraft, but Africa does not have the ability to maintain aircraft, and that's really what hits them hard. Quite a lot of Middle Eastern operators are in Africa today. Falcon has a big presence. Gulf is operating in Angola. Abu Dhabi Aviation's got quite a lot of activity too. So it's nice to see operators in the Middle East taking the expertise to support what's needed in Africa. So in terms of some strategic directives here, consumer and tourism demand is significant. It's growing. Headwinds basically from the heavy segment. So what I mentioned earlier is there's a lack of support for heavy helicopters. And what's that causing is medium helicopters are plugging in the gap. So for every one Mi-8, you're looking at 2 to 3 Bell 412s. But as you move Bell 412s out, then something's going to fill that gap. You're looking at now potentially 145s, 135s, 429s. And so it's a ripple effect. And what's that's causing is a real demand-supply off-kilter in the used market. HEMS is quite a bit of a focus by various governments in Africa, and we're well aware of that. So the investments are certainly rife. There's quite a lot of investments going into Africa, both from governmental perspectives, HEMS, SAR. Global lessors have typically shied away from Africa because of the uncertainty, but things are changing, and I think for good reason too. We are also actively putting aircraft into Africa. Ultimate Aviation's group, that's purchase of offshore helicopter services, has been significant. That one deal itself doubled Ultimate Aviation's group's fleet to close to 38 aircraft. And I did want to point this out, even though I'm talking about the commercial market, this is an interesting point here. There's a lot of demand for aircraft to meet security requirements, specifically by the militaries who are part of the African Union. And in order to get their hands on aircraft that are feasible economically, they're actually turning to commercial aircraft. They're going for commercial 212s, commercial 412s, commercial 205s that have the same mission capabilities as the Hueys, perhaps, or medium-range aircraft, medium-segment aircraft, but at a much lower price point. And by doing that, they can fill the need, they can do it at a low price point, and they can get the aircraft at a quicker pace. So African defense forces are certainly in need of this sort of product. We have not put aircraft in Africa probably for the last 15 years, but in the last 7 months, there's been interest for close to 27 aircraft. So that demand is only increasing. Talking about India, there are 3 pretty large operators, and there's several startup organizations coming up. Kainos they've taken their first S-76C++ from Eagle Copters, and they're actually a hospital, and their goal is to build an integrated HEMS project in India, someday operating 50+ aircraft, and we will be supporting them. We believe it's the right reasons. When we look at Deccan, Himalayan Heritage, I'd say there's probably 15 more operators getting into this space too. The drivers are consumer demand. There's a lot more access to cash for the regular household. So when you think about pilgrimage missions, when you think about movement between cities, people can afford $60 or $50 or $80 if I convert it, and they can do that today. So you imagine going from probably a population of 100 million people out of 1.4 billion that could do that 15 years ago to 400 million people in 10 years, that's significant. That demand is massive. There's a lot of investments that are coming, but I do want to point out that there's still a lot of uncertainty with the aviation sector in India. There's been a recent closure for another airline. I always say, if you find the right partner in India, because of the demand, you'll do fine. But if you don't find the right partner, it could be problematic. The capital markets are still evolving in India, and when they continue to evolve, they will have better access to capital at better interest rates, and that is definitely happening. But when you look at some of the opportunities presenting themselves, the investment opportunities and the internal rate of return, which is the return over a period of time, take into account the discounted value of cash, it is quite attractive. Some of the opportunities, ONGC, which is the National Oil and Gas Company of India, released a 10-year contract. A 10-year contract. No other global oil and gas areas had a 10-year contract. It's the first. They actually even had a roadshow where they called the OEMs, the lessors, the operators around the same table to listen to their concerns, and they built up the RFQ based on everyone's input. That was quite the change. Regional connectivity services. The government is now making available what they call as regional slots from point A to point B. There's about 300 of them, and anyone can bid on them. And if you win them, and you deploy your aircraft to support those slots, the government is guaranteeing 75% of the seats paid for up to 3 years. So you can even go 25%, and you can still make your whole value. It's quite enticing. There's quite a lot of players getting in, but as lessors, we have to be careful because you can't just jump into the aviation market. There's a lot more to consider than just flying aircraft. So now I'd like to talk about a concept of absorption ratios. So absorption ratio is basically is something that we use quite frequently. The smaller the ratio means the quicker the aircraft is moving. From the day it comes on the market to the day it sells, it's literally the life cycle or the lifetime it's available for sale in that market. So the smaller the ratio, the quicker it's moving, the stronger the market. The higher the ratio, aircrafts are not moving, the weaker the market. But do take that with a pinch of salt, because absorption ratios typically are calculated globally, but that would depend based on the vintage of the aircraft, the regional demand, the status of the aircraft not moving. So there's lots of things you've got to look at instead of just taking it at face value. Now, our approach to valuation is simple. We do not overpay beyond what is fair market value, and all these other points. The cost of logistics to move the aircraft, the cost of return to service, the cost of associated documentation, component change, aircraft logs. We need to review all of this stuff before we make a determination on valuation. Inspection review, snag, squawk mitigation, CFA, and all associated documents, including costs. And most importantly, when you go in for a pre-inspection buy, you're not taking every part of the aircraft off. And you have to be able to guesstimate roughly what you're going to be getting into. And that comes with experience. So, if aircrafts are on the market for a couple of $1 million as an example, we do our analysis, and in most cases, we arrive as an example, okay, maybe we think it's only worth $1.2 million. And at the end of the day, you got to stick to your guns. You've got to make sure you protect yourself. Today, we own 80-plus assets flying around the world, and not a single one of those assets are on the wrong side of the valuation. Many a times, we advise customers not to purchase an asset. We tell them, hold off, let's not rush into it. We don't think the numbers make sense. I personally believe, and we believe, the best deal is no deal at times. You don't have to get into it. Because markets will always correct themselves. Opportunities will always come about. The demand and supply ratio will correct itself. But most importantly, if you're buying for a potential demand cycle that you see is going to come through in the next couple of years, it's the best situation to be in. But that takes time to hone those skills. Over the years, our founder, Mel O'Reilly, and his son, Mike O'Reilly, who's running the company today, along with Spike, it's his call sign, his name is David Viting. The three of them, for the last 25 years, have really fine-tuned this concept. How do we evaluate aircraft? How do we make sure we're on the right side of the curve? How do we not overpay? And what they've done has been simply fantastic. Now let's look at some examples. So this is what we do. We take a ton of data, and we analyze it, and then we portray it in this sort of easy-to-view fashion. So in short, we look at the asking price of the aircraft, the low and the high range. We look at the manufacture year on a mean and a max. We look at the days on market. We look at the airframe. So I can tell you right now, the airframe at 50 hours, that's priced at $1.9 million right there. So there's some correlation there. But most importantly, we look at this chart right here. And you typically, if you see aircraft absorption at about 12 months or lower, it means the aircrafts are moving. That means there's aircraft demand, and it's not a bad situation. If the aircraft start to tip in past the orange scale, you got to start questioning what's going on in the market. Looking at some very, I'm going to go through quite a few models right now as we go through this presentation, but the AS350B3E or the 125, it's moving really well. The 407, we being Bell CSF for 44 years now, I have never seen in our time representing Bell an absorption ratio that low. It's really impossible to find 407s today. And when you find them, the prices are way too high. Looking at the H130, it's also in a pretty good situation right now. 135, still in that 6-month timeline. You're typically good right there. Price points also make sense. 109, I'd say it's kind of edging on the perspective where I'd say, okay, what's really going on with the market there? There's quite a few coming off on from about 10 or 12 years of runtime being replaced by newer aircraft. But at the same time, we are cautious about getting into that because we want to make sure we find the right market. H-145, I would not read too much into that in the sense that H-145 is a popular aircraft. She moves well. But with all the updates coming on the H-145, if you look at that model from the time she was inducted first to the time it is today, there's a ton of updates on the aircraft. And some of those updates are not backward compatible. What that does is it really limits the ability for operators to change out technologies because of the backward compatibility issue. So you'll find a lot of older aircraft sitting and not moving, and that's really what's causing the issue. The 169s, quite frankly, you can't really get a used aircraft anymore. It's a newer aircraft, high demand, can't find one. 429, good situation again. 412 EPs, that dial was past 30 months up until 2 years ago. Post the geopolitical situation going on in Europe, you're starting to see it come back around, and I believe it's going to land into the 12-month range in the next 6 months. There's a significant demand for 412s right now. 139, they are moving, but what we're seeing at 139s, aircraft past 10 to 11 years old, they're not moving because they're not 7-ton. They're not OGP compatible. If the aircraft is 5 to 7 years and younger, it's meeting a lot of the oil and gas contracts today, and they are hard to find. But once they're past the range of that 10 years, there's quite a few of those aircraft on the market right now. S76C++, that was an interesting situation. I remember just making a point earlier, buying product, anticipating a market change. We saw the squeeze in supply chain coming. We saw that the fact that they could not, OEMs couldn't get twin-engine aircraft, 135s, 145s, 169s in time for the market. And we took a bet on the C++s, which really took quite a bit of a hammering from the oil and gas crash. 60% of those transactions was from Eagle Copters alone. We acquired 17 aircraft, a ton of inventory that probably would have built up another 10 aircraft from there. And we've started to put aircraft out back into the market at a significantly lower price point for a comparable platform in other OEM situations. So we have moved about 7 to 10 aircraft, and there's demand for another 15. So it was an interesting play for Eagle Copters in that sense, but that's the kind of perspective that you got to take. Okay, what do you see happening? Where's the situation? Can you buy at a low point to make a good profit? Here's an overview of aircraft movements in the last 24 months. As you can see, it's a very active market. The light twos, which is really a 407, H125, AW119, and the intermediates, they're moving at a very significant pace. Intermediates are your 135s, your Bell 429s, and a lot of demand still in that space. Even your mediums are moving at a pretty good rate. The bottom line is you cannot get a used aircraft with fair market value today. It's very difficult to do that. And the numbers show that perspective. So in summary, the market is very active. There's several government and parapublic contracts that are now coming into play, ones that were previously postponed because of COVID. There's a significant demand for utility and firefighting, given what's going on in the world today. HEMS, we only see that increasing in terms of install base. Consumer spending around the world, especially in the emerging markets, is driving up the demand for charter, for tourism. I'm not sure if most of you have heard about the pilgrimage business in India, and let me give you this quick example here. I was shocked when I studied this about a year and a half ago. There's something called as the Char Dhams that take place, which is the 4 pilgrimages in northern India. It only runs for 6 months out of the year, and there can only be 27 aircraft operating in the valleys of the Char Dham because of the way the topography is and the density associated with it. Those aircraft today are putting in 150 hours a month, sometimes 170 hours a month. It's astronomical in terms of, it's astounding numbers. the margins those operators are making are significant, and there's not enough of aircraft. So there are these very interesting niches around the world that most people, I'd say back in North America and Europe, are really not fully akin to. But the reality of the matter is, as more of these emerging markets pick up pace, you'll see a lot more such segments coming online. Supply chain challenges are definitely here today. It plagues new aircraft inductions. It also plagues parts supply from the OEM. And it's not the OEM's fault. It is the supply chain situation going on around the world. The way we address that is there's also a lot of used assets that you can buy. If you can tag along to organizations that have an AMO capability to issue Form 1s or 8130s, it's going to solve your problems. And it's something for, as operators, to consider. We do believe that the supply-demand model in itself is off-kilter compared to the last 7 to 10 years, and it will take a couple of more years to get relieved. That's all I have.